We had just finished singing happy birthday to our son. Laughter, cake, balloons, the perfect family moment. As I tucked our little boy into bed that night, my heart was full. Then, in the quiet after, my husband looked at me with cold eyes and said the words that shattered everything: "I've been seeing someone else." He thought I'd cry. He thought I'd beg. Instead, I smiled, because I already knew. And what I'd planned next would turn his world upside down. The morning of our son Ethan's 6th birthday was full of cheerful chaos, balloons being blown up, frosting being licked off little fingers, and tiny footsteps racing through the house. I had spent the whole week planning everything: handmade decorations, a dinosaur cake, and a small party in our backyard with just close friends and family. My husband, Ryan, had been oddly distant in recent weeks, often retreating to the garage or glued to his phone, but I chalked it up to work stress. After all, he had always been a little aloof, and I was used to picking up the emotional slack in our relationship. As the guests arrived and the kids screamed in excitement, Ryan put on his usual charm, playing the part of the perfect dad. He helped light the candles, took pictures with Ethan, and even kissed me on the cheek for a photo. But I noticed the quick glances at his phone, the brief moments of detachment, and the way he stepped away from the crowd to take a call he claimed was from a client. I didn't say anything. Not yet. What he didn't know was that 3 weeks prior, I'd received an anonymous message through Instagram. It was just a screenshot, Ryan's name in a series of flirty text messages with someone named Mel. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought maybe someone was trying to stir up drama. But when I confronted him casually about his sudden long nights at the office, he dismissed me with a condescending laugh and said I was overthinking everything. So I started paying attention. I checked his location one night and found he'd lied about being stuck in traffic. He was parked outside a townhouse 20 minutes away. I didn't confront him then. I just documented everything, saving texts, call logs, and even took photos when I spotted him at a coffee shop with her. Blonde, a bit younger than me, with a fake laugh that echoed as he leaned in way too close. They looked like a couple from afar, comfortable, familiar. I couldn't believe it. 18 years together. A house, a child, a life built from scratch. And now he was risking it all for some side fling who didn't know how to pronounce quinoa. Still, I kept it together for Ethan's sake. I didn't want his birthday to be tainted by his father's betrayal. The party ended, guests filtered out, and Ethan, covered in cake frosting and laughter, finally fell asleep after the best day of his little life. I was cleaning up stray cups from the patio when Ryan came up behind me, arms crossed, looking unusually serious. "We need to talk," he said flatly. I turned to him, letting the evening breeze cool my face. "Sure. What's up?" He hesitated for a second, like he wasn't sure if this was a good idea. Then he said, "I've been seeing someone." I didn't want to lie anymore. His voice was void of remorse, as if this was a minor update on a weather app, not the demolition of our marriage. I stared at him for a moment, heart pounding, but not from shock, only from anticipation. I had waited for this moment. I put down the cup I was holding and folded my hands. "I know," I said softly. That threw him off. He blinked. What?" "I know about Melanie. I've known for a while." He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence was thick. I continued. "I saw the texts. I saw the photos. I know where she lives. I know what nights you've been lying to me. And I haven't said a word because I wanted to see how long it would take you to tell me. So congratulations, Ryan. You finally came clean. Just a little too late." He looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. "You've been spying on me?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "I've been protecting myself." His jaw clenched. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. Things haven't been the same between us. And instead of working on that, you decided to destroy what we had. He had the nerve to say, I didn't destroy it alone. That's when I knew he still didn't understand the depth of what he had done. He thought this was just a fight. That I'd cry, maybe throw something, and we'd fall into some dysfunctional reconciliation loop like always. But not this time. I gave him a tired smile. You're right. We both played a part. I ignored the red flags. I stayed when I should have left. I trusted someone who didn't deserve it. But that ends tonight. I walked past him into the house, pulled open a drawer, and grabbed a file folder I'd hidden there earlier. Inside were printed copies of everything, texts, photos, timestamps. I had even spoken to a lawyer who prepared a document outlining my custody request and asset claims. I walked back outside and handed the folder to him. This is your exit package, I said simply. Ryan opened it and his face turned pale. I'll file it Monday. I've already spoken to Ethan's school about the transition, and the house will be in my name until the judge says otherwise. You can go stay with Melanie. I hear she makes a great kale salad. He didn't say anything. Just stood there, folder in hand, the night swallowing the confidence he'd come home with. He didn't know it yet, but everything he'd built was about to crumble. The moment Mark stepped out to take a phone call, I stood there frozen, holding the shards of my shattered heart in my chest, pretending like everything was okay. Our son, Jamie, was still happily playing with his birthday gifts, completely unaware that his father had just torn our family apart with a single sentence. I had known Mark was distant lately, yes. I had suspected something wasn't right. But hearing the words, I've been seeing someone else, whispered so casually in the hallway, moments after singing happy birthday to our child, was a dagger straight through my soul. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I stared at the pieces around me, his family, my family, friends, neighbors, all gathered in our home celebrating our child's life, while my marriage silently bled out in the next room. I smiled. I served cake. I cleaned up wrapping paper. I even thanked guests as they left, hugging them with trembling arms and offering polite smiles, all while a storm roared behind my eyes. When the last guest left and Jamie was tucked into bed, Mark looked at me with a smug kind of bravery, the kind you wear when you think you've won. I told you. I didn't want to lie anymore. Her name's Rachel. I'm moving out this weekend. He poured himself a drink like he hadn't just burned his life to the ground. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. Because I already knew more than he thought. Rachel wasn't just anyone. She was someone I recognized. She worked at his office. I had seen the flirty messages on his smartwatch when he forgot to lock it one evening. I had seen the lunch receipts from fancy restaurants I'd never been to. And most importantly, I had seen her, at Jamie's school, standing in the pickup line beside Mark's car one day when I left work early. That's when I started documenting everything. Every text. Every receipt. Every accidental voicemail. I even hired a friend who did freelance investigations to follow him for 2 weeks. Pictures, timestamps, phone records, it was all in a folder locked in my closet, labeled for when he lies. And now he had finally admitted it. I calmly told him I understood. You deserve to be happy, I said. His brows lifted, confused. So do I added. Then I walked into our bedroom, locked the door, and started packing, not my things, but his. Every shirt, every shoe, every razor, every trophy of his ego went into a suitcase. I didn't shout. I didn't break anything. But I made sure he saw what I was doing. What are you doing? He asked, trying to sound irritated but clearly caught off guard. "You said you're leaving, right?" "Just saving you time," I replied flatly. He looked stunned. I knew he expected tears. Begging. Accusations. Drama. But what he got was preparation. Control. Silence louder than rage. The next day, I emailed the evidence to my lawyer, who I had contacted a week earlier when the first red flag turned into confirmation. The divorce papers were already drafted. I scheduled a meeting at his office and had them served to him there, at lunchtime, right in front of his coworkers. I made sure Rachel was on that floor when it happened. Mark tried to call that evening. First to apologize, then to accuse. "You embarrassed me at work," he snapped. "No," I said coldly. "You embarrassed yourself. I just made sure the truth was visible." He had no idea I'd been this prepared. And when he saw how airtight the documentation was, how thoroughly I had recorded every step of his infidelity, including texts where he left Jamie unattended to meet up with Rachel, his smirk started to fade. But that wasn't even the part that shook him the most. What truly cracked him open was the letter I handed him 2 days later, a simple envelope I passed to him when he came to pick up some of his things. Inside was a copy of a recommendation I had written to the school board, Jamie's school, where Mark had volunteered occasionally and was once up for a position on the PTA. In it, I detailed why I believed he was no longer fit to participate in any school activities. It was detailed, factual, and accompanied by photos and witness statements gathered discreetly. I told him I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it to protect my son. Because I didn't want Jamie around a man who could so carelessly betray his family. The letter wasn't emotional, it was factual, calm, and rooted in concern. And that's what made it powerful. Mark finally realized that the person he had underestimated was the one who held every card now. And I was just getting started. The days that followed weren't easy, but they were transformative. With Mark officially moved out, our home felt emptier, yes, but also calmer. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without suspicion clogging the air. Jamie, thankfully, was too young to fully grasp the shift. I told him Daddy had moved into a new place but would still see him often. He asked a few innocent questions, but kids sense tension more than they understand it. I made sure he still felt loved, safe, and protected. Meanwhile, Mark tried to regain control. He sent a barrage of texts, first trying to explain himself, then accusing me of being heartless, and finally attempting to guilt me. "We can figure this out," he wrote one night. "Jamie needs both of us under one roof." I didn't reply. The truth was, Mark wasn't worried about Jamie, he was worried about his reputation. Word of the very public divorce filing had begun to trickle through his office. His coworkers, some of whom were at Jamie's party, knew he'd been involved with Rachel. I had never planned to embarrass him. I didn't need revenge. But I refused to protect the image of a man who shattered our vows in silence and expected me to smile through the ruins. Rachel, it turned out, wasn't the long-term fairy tale he envisioned. About 3 weeks after Mark moved in with her, I received a message, anonymous at first. But when I read it, I knew exactly who sent it. "She's not who he thinks she is," it began. Attached were screenshots of Rachel messaging another coworker, flirtatiously, dated while she was with Mark. Apparently, Mark's new relationship had started to unravel as soon as it was exposed to the real world, away from secrecy and excitement. The woman who had enticed him in shadows wasn't as charming under daylight. I didn't gloat. I didn't even respond. I had moved past that part of the story. My focus now was building a stable, healthy environment for Jamie and myself. Still, I had one more step to take. Mark had always handled the finances, or at least, he thought he did. What he didn't realize was that I had full access, and I had quietly tracked every transaction for years. When I reviewed our accounts, I noticed he had withdrawn a significant amount right before the party. Likely to fund his new start with Rachel. But half of that was community property. I flagged it immediately and handed it to my lawyer. In the divorce mediation, when Mark tried to claim that I was being unfair in asking for child support and half of all assets, my lawyer calmly presented the financial discrepancies, as well as a timeline of his infidelity and abandonment. Mark sat red-faced and tight-lipped, no longer the smug man who announced he was leaving me for someone else. His lawyer glanced at the documents and leaned over to whisper something to him. Mark didn't speak again for the rest of the meeting. We reached a settlement that gave me full custody with supervised visitation until Jamie was older. I kept the house, a fair share of the savings, and primary say in Jamie's schooling and routines. It wasn't about punishment, it was about protection. Mark didn't fight it. A few weeks later, Rachel left him. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she moved to another state and blocked his number. He'd lost not only his marriage and son's trust, but also the woman he gave it all up for. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. My story began circulating, not because I shared it publicly, but because the attorney I worked with was impressed by the thoroughness and clarity with which I presented everything. She asked me to consider writing about it or sharing my story to help other women going through betrayal and silent battles. I agreed, cautiously at first. A local women's organization invited me to speak, and I told my story, anonymously. I talked about resilience, preparedness, and silent strength. Not rage. Not revenge. Just truth and action. The response was overwhelming. Women came up to me afterward in tears, thanking me for showing that it was possible to be calm in the face of chaos, to protect yourself and your children without becoming bitter. I was invited again, and then again. Soon I was helping draft guides for women navigating unexpected separation. My pain had quietly become my power. Mark, on the other hand, spiraled for a while. He tried to rekindle a connection with Jamie, but children remember what they feel, even if they don't remember all the facts. Jamie was polite, but distant. He didn't ask to call his dad. He stopped drawing pictures of mommy and daddy. Instead, he drew pictures of me and him at the park, or me helping him build Lego castles. I kept every one of those pictures. One day, months later, Mark sent a message, "I'm sorry for everything. I ruined it all." I read it. Then I deleted it. Because by then, I had already stepped into the next chapter of my life, stronger, wiser, and most importantly, free. It's strange how something that once felt like the end of the world can become the beginning of your freedom. Looking back, that night, my son's birthday party, the moment Mark confessed his betrayal, wasn't the end of my life. It was the end of a lie I had been living. It was the collapse of a structure built on deceit, and though the crash was loud and painful, it cleared the space for something far more honest to be built. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. There were nights when I cried until I couldn't breathe, when I stared at the ceiling wondering how I didn't see it sooner, how I could have been so easily discarded after years of loyalty. But healing isn't linear. It doesn't look like a straight line. Some days you feel powerful, others you feel shattered. But slowly, I began to stitch myself back together, not into the woman I was before, but into someone entirely new. I learned how to stand on my own. I learned that silence, when used wisely, is louder than screaming. That dignity in the face of betrayal can be a woman's greatest weapon. And that the people who truly matter, my son, my family, my real friends, never once made me feel like I was less because of what I went through. Mark? He became a cautionary tale in our social circle, not because I ruined him, but because he ruined himself. Actions have consequences, even when they're dressed up in charm and smiles. Now, every time I hold my son, every time I see him thrive in the peace we've created together, I know I made the right decision. I chose truth. I chose peace. I chose me. And I don't regret it for a second.